Okay, go bump. Come here, come here. Good boy. Come on, get up here. Get up here. Oh, you did a good dog. You did a good dog. Oh, you did a good dog. Okay, go. Go away. All right. What we have here is my independent rear suspension, solid front beam suspension, 2-liter V-dub Jetta rear wheel drive mountain dune buggy. It's my ass backwards interpretation of what goes on inside my stupid head. Spectrum. But I think Spectrum's just kind of an excuse for people to kind of think that them and Elon Musk are kindred spirits. You're not. But, you know, well, don't sugarcoat it, because if you do, fat people are just going to eat it. Conventionally, people that build dune buggies and do things, if you're being normal, you think to yourself, well, I want lower gears, because I want to be able to climb. And plus, I still want to be able to play in the sand. So they either pay money or get a friend to help them build, change a transmission. And the transmission of choice for most of those people is a 3, 5, or 6 rib bus. And they're an amazing thing. The Germans did a phenomenal job designing that. And there's aftermarket support. Now, admittedly, getting hard to find the parts, but you can build that transmission however you want. With super low gears, super high gears, super close together. You can even build it where you have a good low starting gear, high speed gear. And that is generally what most people do when they say, hey, I'm going to build a buggy, right? Just from the ground up, they're going to say, I'm going to start with some sort of V-dub bus transaxle. Which, that sounds super freaking stupid to do what everybody else already is doing. Now, this project isn't my first, and it will probably not be my last, that makes absolutely no sense to the average person. But if even more than 2 people are walking in a direction, Norm says, well, that space is crowded. Why don't I go over here where I don't see anybody? After they've decided they're going to use a bus transmission, right? Said individual, if they're poor, or it's already what they have, or they don't really intend to do a lot of performance type things to it, they'll just slap a Volkswagen motor in there. And if they're poor, it's probably a 1600 dual port that's tired, burns a quart of oil between every other weekend, and you know, just all around, you know, maybe has 30 horse. It's like real heavy on the maybe, but you know, you put it in there with low enough gears, and you probably have factory V-dub suspension. That thing's gonna be a billy goat. It's gonna climb just about anywhere you want, no problems, right? But the people that have money and are gonna start building a buggy, they're gonna look and say, well, I think I could put an Ecotec, or I could put a Subaru, or hell, I could even get a J-Series Honda, or I could even do a 4.3 liter V6 out of a Blazer, you know. And all these options are generally plentiful. There isn't a junkyard in America that doesn't have a dozen of them, and they're fuel injected. You don't have to deal with a nasty carburetor. You know, they're more complex in the fact that, yes, you do have to do an aftermarket ECU, or you've got to get somebody to cut back an ECU, or you got to do it yourself and cut back the loom and do the factory ECU from a car. But, you know, I think I know some people that did it, and my instincts are, well, that son of a bitch is dumb. I think I can do it too. I mean, they're not really dumb, but my ego tells me they are. So that's the conventional route. Bus transmission, some sort of fuel-injected 4-cylinder, maybe a V6, tail dragger out the back, and hey, you've got a fun family toy that the right driver behind it, you could follow all the guys in the 4x4 community, no problem. And forget about thinking that your Razor's hot shit, because I'm sorry, a lot of these buggies are open diff in the rear, and we'll follow you anywhere that you want to go. But that's the stock direction that most people would go. The reason a Volkswagen Jetta, I can't pinpoint it directly, but I can point out some of the features that generally I like. One, the engine was mass produced in varieties from 1.4 liter all the way up until 2.2 liter, maybe, I don't know. But that inline 4-cylinder single overhead and cab motor has been just worked thoroughly for Volkswagen since the mid 80s all the way up until today. And I don't know if they still make it now, but I know a lot of the diesel configurations are in a similar state. So I know the engine's super reliable. And hey, guess what? I found that engine for 50 bucks. So I don't even know if it works, but we'll find out. The factory transmission that came with this was something called a Volkswagen O2J. And the O2J is interesting because it's what's in the original front wheel drive Beetles and the front wheel drive Jettas. And it's a 5-speed transmission with reverse. Racers and offensive. Hi dogs, come here. Come here. Good dogs, good dogs. Now, go away, I don't like you. So there's a real aftermarket support for those transmissions. So my thought was, well, you know, I'm going to buy one of those, and hey, maybe I can figure out how to build a close ratio and do whatever and kind of get some lower gears out of it. But then as I was looking into the transmission charts, I actually found one that already has a 423 ring and pinion final drive, and I'm thinking, well, that's pretty okay, because I know the buses you can get up in 538s and 638 ring and pinions, so you know the buses you can still go lower, but in your standard Volkswagen Beetle, you're using a 411. Maybe you have a 437 if you're in a swing axle, but you know, and everybody that has a swing axle loves them because just that little bit from a 411 to 437, it's nice when you're out climbing and playing in the desert and crawling on the rocks. Well, and so that was my thought. Now, the big problem with the O2J is, though, and I don't know if that engine's in frame, but there's two options when you're setting it up. If you just center the engine and transmission, kind of get it centered in space, you're going to have mislinked axles. Having one short, having one long may work, but then you'll run into a problem that you might have one side that has less travel than the other one. Now, I didn't really want to do that, so I centered up the diff. But now that the diff's centered, like 90% of the motor is on the passenger side. So it's going to have to kind of make an imbalance, maybe, because I've got that cast iron motor sitting in the back corner. But I kind of think that after I put a fuel tank, radiator, and my fat ass on the driver's side, probably balance out pretty okay. Now, putting the motor so close to that side of the trailing arm presented another problem. I couldn't run a conventional trailing arm that had your pivot on the outside and then an inner pivot. Because the motor's too close, the path for the inner pivot to the outside was right in line with where the motor was. Well, how did I solve that problem? Instead of running a conventional trailing arm suspension, similar to a Volkswagen, but it would have been independent with shocks, I ran what was, I guess, technically a 3-link, where I have a solid trailing arm on the side, and then I run 2 parallel links off the back to take up that load. Now, I don't know what the exact term of it, but I'll just call it the Gazer 3-link because it looks awfully similar to what Gazers run on the back of a Polaris RZR. Okay, but the problem with that parallel link back suspension, well, the Norm's 3-link suspension, here I did it with 2, 3-link suspension, is that inherently, because the back parallel links are moving in an arc, it's going to be changing your, not caster, camber. So the camber of the wheels are going to be moving a little bit. And that's not the worst thing in the world, because when you could set it up, you could set up ride height where it has even camber, and then as the suspension droops, it might have negative camber, but as it goes this way, it'll have positive camber. Positive camber is probably pretty helpful under a turn, especially if you have the outside wheel, because then it's the tire isn't wanting to buckle over. But because those links are getting shorter and longer, it's actually affecting the toe in and the toe out. Yes, it's probably going to wear tires. Yes, it's probably going to wander off the road. Does Norm care? maybe, but you know, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe it won't. Maybe it won't even be all that much. Because right now, because it moves on an arc, the toe in and toe out factor is a little over 1/4 inch. So that's really only an 1/8 inch per side. Now, is that a problem? If I was driving 75 down the freeway and I hit a bump, probably, but even when I'm going hard and fast out in the dirt, we're not doing more than 50. So, and, you know, haven't died yet. Okay, what? As it sits right now, the rear suspension has about 12 inches of travel, and it moves about 1/4 inch toe in from top to bottom. And you know, the setup's really nice because I can use Type 2 CVs, which is what's factory on that O2J. You can buy them on Apple Tree Auto. You know, they come in inch increments, so I can buy a separate set of axles and set it up. Just run Type 2s. So, all right. Now the front suspension. Conventionally on these buggies, at least from the time when people started building buggies, they would effectively just take the front end from a Volkswagen Beetle, whether it be link pin or ball joint, and they would set that up, and they would either just, it'd already be attached to the pan, or they would just buy clamps and bolt it directly to their tubing frame, and Bob's your uncle, you had steering. It was effectively no different than how it came on the car. And it works extremely well on very light stock suspension 2 or 4 seat buggies. But that's pretty boring, right? When we start wanting to do, we want a cushier seat, more horsepower, and a smoother ride. Well, I don't exactly have cushy seats in this, but I want a smoother ride. Plus, I want it to be cheap. So we have a way where we can take these are stock link pin arms, and we have a jig where we can cut these and extend these almost 4 inches. And when it's all said and done on the factory beam, you can get almost 16 inches of travel out of that suspension just with the old link pin suspension. And it works, and it's amazing. But the added stress you put on there does one of two things. The spindles on these stock link pins are hollow. And the reason it was hollow is because that's where the speedometer used to run on the old link pin style. So these are prone to breaking. Now I broke one pair on my big buggy, and then on my wife's buggy we recently broke one when we were at Dumont this winter. And it's because it's this hollow side. Now, you can reinforce that and, you know, maybe it'll hold. I found the German ones seem to hold up better than the junky Chinese empty ones we get, but, you know. The other thing that happens on these is right there. It'll bust right there, and your link pin will bust apart. And that's usually when you go independent, because when you're going on the factory setup, you actually have torsion springs, so you have even pressure as this moves up and down through the travel. When you go to 100% independent, all the weight is on the bottom bushing, and so it causes a lot of stress right here. So there's kits you can buy and strengthen this up, and there's a lot of things you can do. And if you've got a whole bunch of pile of these parts, it can be cost effective. Admittedly, your link pin bushings wear out really quick, and you always kind of just have this front end wobble. No matter how much you tighten it, you always just kind of have this front end wobble. And the only way you can get rid of that front end wobble is go to a stock length, because they don't wear out near as fast when the link pin is in its stock configuration. That seems like a lot of nonsense that doesn't really explain why I put beam from a two-wheel drive XJ Jeep underneath here. I mean, it doesn't seem to make sense. So in a nutshell, I was planning to build this buggy, and I even had the back suspension all squared up, and I was starting to build the frame forward. And I'm talking with my buddy Alex, I'm talking with my brother Andy, and we're talking through ideas. And the easy thing would have been is I have a beam up there in my loft. I could have just took down that link pin beam and built some clamps and bolted it to the front, and Bob's your uncle. I could have just had link pin suspension with all those problems I just told about, or none of them if I just kept them in the factory form, right? And Alex was telling me, you know, hey, you just ought to go A-arm, we could figure it out, build your own spindles. And So I priced out Heim joints and everything and spindles to do that, and I came up looking at it was probably going to be like $500 or $600 in parts. And well, I'll just go link pin, and I've got the arms, but I'm kind of running out of these knuckles and these bushings, so I was looking for used ones online, and sure enough I found them, but I was looking $300 or $400 just to get parts for this, and then they do sell a different style spindle that doesn't have the braking problem called a combo spindle, but though just those knuckles and spindles are like $500-600 just for them on their own. So I'm weighing the options, thinking where can my money best suited for this project. Then I'm sitting there talking with my brother, and my brother's pretty good at of throwing out the wild idea, and I don't think he ever thought when he threw this out there it would land, but he just jokingly said, "Hey, you ought to run a solid beam." And then said, "Solid beam? Well, what do you mean?" He says, "Yeah, just run a solid beam, and just kind of like it's a solid axle on a truck, but without the, the guts, the diff, all this, like solid beam." And I thought, well, okay. Well, yeah, I like the sound of that. But then I started kind of pricing things out, and well, sure enough, one of these solid beams, and I have you in mind, this is effectively a Dana 30 without the Dana 30 center on it. But the knuckles, the spindles, the hubs, the C's, they're all the same parts to a Dana 30. If you cut this apart and put a Dana 30 center in there, you could use it as that. And in fact, the hubs are the same one. They just have a little stub shaft that doesn't go to anything to hold the bearing together. And I went to a junkyard and I found one of these, and I ripped it out in about an hour, and I paid $85 for it. And that's where it really got me, is pricing everything out. Even to the V-dub link pin, I was looking probably an extra $400 just to get that set up. Between the springs that I got for free, the two-wheel drive XJ beam, and the bushings to do all the link pin, I'm less than $100 in this setup, minus probably the metal. I probably need to add the metal in there, not minus, plus adding the metal. And even to the point there, like this is the tie rod that was with it. These joints were the joints that came with it. I got that all for $85. And I thought, well, hell, I'll just put that together. Now, it does kind of seem ass backwards, a little. But, then again, Norm isn't conventional. Hey, I've got an independent rear suspension with a solid beam front. I mean, that's how the beam came about. Now, as soon as I drug the beam home, then I had that whole can of worms. I had to decide, what do I buy? Heim joints? Those are expensive. Do I just run bushings? Okay, what kind of bushings do I need? Okay, what's the science? Okay, am I going to run a triangulated 4-link, or am I going to run a triangulated 3-link with a panhard bar? Or am I going to just do like a Dodge style suspension where I do 2 long Y-links with a panhard bar? And in the end, with the space that came out, I decided to do a single lower triangulated 4-link. Now, I think compact wise, that actually was the most effective way, but that presented a new problem. I did a single triangulated 4-link up front, and I did the triangle on the bottom because I figured that was the best place for ground clearance. And so far it's pretty good. Just grabbing side to side. There really isn't a lot of side to side flex. I still haven't finished the dual shears on the top links, so I know it'll ridge it up there. But as of right now, side to side walk, just me forcing it, there's maybe a 16th inch. So I don't think this axle is going to move side to side, and especially too because it's not a driven axle. So even though I'm going to use the brakes on it, there isn't going to be really torsional force like it's pulling itself along. Now, but the next problem that I have is because I'm running a drag link tie rod setup with a pitman arm forward, as the suspension moves up and down, it's not bump steer. I guess it is bump steer, but it's inherently, as this rod gets shorter in that arc, it's going to push. And as of right now, from full droop to compress, it goes a quarter turn of the steering wheel one way, and then it hits a point where I think ride height's going to be, and then it goes back that quarter turn. And that's the problem of not running a panhard bar in this setup. Now if I want to fix it, there might be enough play if I just run a panhard bar that's on the other side of this, that's at the same height as this. It, in theory, would get rid of that, but I don't want to do that because I don't have a lot of room behind here, and I still need to put some Fox IFP smooth body shocks in the center. If I was doing 70 miles per hour down the freeway and I hit a bump, it's probably dangerous, but it's just a buggy. It's just going out in the dirt. To solve some of that bump steer issue, I added this silly up bar on my tie rod, and this tie rod is just a placeholder right now. I've got to build a better one because right now it's flimsy. And yes, this could cause issues with torsional load because I'm relying on my pinch bolts on my ball joints to keep this from rotating. But I don't know, we'll see. I mean, I'm going to have a full toolkit with me so I can hopefully straighten, repair. It's probably going to have a winch on it so we can pull and pry and try and straighten things out if they bend. But that was the mainstay of why I went this direction, because 1, it was cheap, 2, it was different, and 3, because you know what? Because I wanted to. I don't think I'm ever going to break those C's. I'll never break a spindle, and I've got nice heavy-duty disc brakes right up front, and those are all things that are downsides or difficult things about doing a beam suspension. And I like the idea of doing an arm suspension, but I can't wrap my head around it with this. Where this was easy to wrap my head around, and it was easy to get 10 inches of travel, just like that. So 10 inches isn't the greatest, but where I said this is my mountain buggy, I think it'll be enough. And it'll be nice to have the spindles and the front wheel straight. Yeah, the link pin, long travel suspension, your link pins just go to hell in a handbasket the first ride, and then there's always just this little broop, 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 broop when you're riding, and you don't really notice it in the sand because the sand's generally smooth, but when you're out in the desert you notice it because you'll go around a turn and your tire just decides it wants to look sideways at you. Alright, so now to the oddball point of this whole thing, and why I kind of started doing this video. I've got a buddy that tells me he really enjoys watching my videos. Now, admittedly, this buddy lives out of state, so he can't come over and hang out because life has taken us to excess places. And I'll admit, I like where I live, and I've got my brother and a good friend and quite a few good friends that are right here close. I've even got family that are about 30-40 minutes away that in a moment's notice they can come down and visit. I have a conversation with this buddy, and he told me, he says, I really like watching your odds and end videos and your projects, and I'm not doing this anything, you know, for any other reason, just because it's kind of nice. I know my grandma likes watching the videos, and you know, she can't get out and go explore in these places we go, but if I make a video out in the desert, out in the sand dunes, she tells me she enjoys it. She feels like she got to go and experience it with everybody. But my buddy told me, he said, Norm, I know you think you sound stupid, but you've got to talk to the camera. You've got to explain what's going on, which in my eyes, like when I watch this back, I'm going to listen to myself, and I'm going to want to kick my own ass because I'm going to think I sound very unintelligible. I sound like somebody that shouldn't be doing what they're doing. Man, how could you sound that stupid, Norm? That's all I hear in my head. So, but then again, I guess I'll throw Rod a cookie and say, hey Rod, because he'll ask me questions. We'll talk on the phone and he'll explain, well, how come you thought this would work there? And I'll tell him a little story. I said, well, you know, I was bored one day and I had $1, and I don't know if this is a thing, but you have to pay $1 or $2 to just walk around the junkyard around here. I don't know. I know there's closed junkyards where they don't even let you, but the open junkyards here, you got to pay $1. But I kind of like paying that $1. I mean, that's like me paying $1 to like a, you know, like a wax museum or something, or just a little side road attraction. I just like seeing what's in there, and because I'm always curious, because you never know, there might be parts, and so And I'll tell a story how it says, well, I was just walking a junkyard one day and I noticed this model one year used this part, and so I was in there and I had a pair of vice grips, so I took it off and then went over to a Ford or something and saw, hey, look, that part matches. And just come to find out all these little ins and out details of the automotive industry that, yeah, just because it says Ford on it, well, Ford and GM are buying from the same place and putting the same parts on. For some things, not for all things. And it usually winds out in a story where I look at that and say, well, man, I wonder how I could use that in a buggy, or I could use that in a car, or I could use that to build this or that, whatever. And he told me some of those stories I'm telling are the most interesting things he's ever heard, and he just can't fathom how Norm came to that conclusion. And I'm not special. I'm just some dumb kid from Utah that thought, hey, well, you know, didn't necessarily have the money to you know, do a lot of these things, but I was curious enough that, well, I want to try something. It's like just to set up a standard long travel V6 fuel injected sand rail with a Mendiola transmission, you're looking at least 20 grand, 20 to 30 grand just to do that. And my Audi V6 sand rail, I think the original cost to put that thing together was like $4,000, and it served me well, and it has a real smooth ride. Yes, I did buy used beard seats, but you know, my wife, she knows how to sew, and so she built some new covers for it, and they worked out great, and they're still on there today. And yeah, and I think I paid $100 for those seats instead of buying $600 new. And you know, you do that 20 times in a project, instead of spending $500, you spend $100. You know, it gets pretty cheap pretty quick. So I hope this answers some of Rod's questions. Now, admittedly, I'm gonna edit this together, and I'm just gonna look at it. I'm just gonna think you're a clown. And if you made it this far in the video, well, I thank you for watching. But you know, I'm not gonna do any of those weird things that say like, share, subscribe, join my Patreon that doesn't exist. But you know, and if you drive a Razor, don't drink too much Bud Light.